But we are in Psalm 140, and this is actually also a very appropriate psalm for tonight and in the day in which we live. Now, this psalm is particularly regarding the physical danger that David was in, but at the same time, I was thinking also application to the modern day for us as to the spiritual danger, and which can also turn into physical danger. Not quite to the well, I shouldn't say not quite, but not near to the extent that David was facing as far as the physical danger and running for his life. But there's greater. We do live in days of greater physical danger, and then also, but there's great spiritual danger in America and throughout the world in the day in which we live, and we see why that is. Why is it dangerous for us? Why is it so important for us to really be focused on the priorities of what we should be living for? Because it was because we are living in days of great peril, spiritual peril, perilous times. In the last days, perilous times shall come. And it's dangerous times. And so David was living in dangerous times for himself personally. And I'd say we live in increasingly dangerous times. Now, as we hear the crime rates increasing, violent crime rates increasing in some of the cities and a lot of shootings, that is not new, actually. There have been times in our nation's history where certain cities like New York faced a lot of violence and a lot of crime and things. So things can go back and forth. Just because there's a lot of more shootings and crime in New York and Chicago and other places now doesn't mean it's always going to be that way. It just there's the ebb and flow. There's the back and forth, and a lot of New York City got cleaned up based on the mayors that they've had and their policing and various things. So it just seems like we're kind of going back the other way now toward more danger in some parts of big cities. And so there are places where it is more physically dangerous. Now, Greenfield is probably not a hot spot for physical danger and shootings every day and every night and all that kind of thing. But every place, any type of city, and Greenfield technically is a city, could have its dangerous times and dangerous people around. But we're not focused so much on the physical danger aspect tonight as we are the spiritual danger, and taking these applications from Psalm 140 to David and what he was facing. And there are some interesting aspects to this psalm of what he recognized, basically who he was dealing with, and then what his prayer was to God, the aspect of his prayer, and then in the midst of that as to who he's dealing with. And so let's read let's just start with Psalm 140, verses 1 through 5. So we'll not read the entire psalm right up front, but let's start with verses 1 through 5. It says, "Deliver me, O Lord, from the evil man, preserve me from the violent man, which imagine mischiefs in their heart, continually are they gathered for war. They have sharpened their tongues like a serpent, adder's poison is under their lips, Selah. Keep me, O Lord, from the hands of the wicked, preserve me from the violent man, who have purpose to overthrow my goings. The proud have hid a snare for me, and cords. They have spread a net by the wayside. They have set gins for me, Selah." And so in these first 5 verses, we see the characteristics of evil men, who David was dealing with. And we can look at the parallels of what we deal with today with the evil men. And so the first thing we see is that they are, it says evil man. And then we also see the characteristic of evil men being violent. In the days of Noah, in the days in the days where before God destroyed the earth with a flood, the Bible says that the earth was filled with violence, and violence is it's a byproduct of when there is a wicked and rebellious people. The more wickedness and rebellion you have, the more violence there is going to be. And you can look through history. Think about the Roman Empire and their gladiators and the bloodthirstiness of the crowds and their entertainment and people being thrown to the, having to face the lions. And even today there's, in Spain, it's probably canceled for this year, but in Spain every year they have the running of the bulls, and there's, inevitably somebody's going to get gored by the running of the bulls. To me, the best way to avoid being gored by a bull is just not to have the running of the bulls. That'd be to each their own. I mean, if that's their thing, I mean, go for it. But there's violence involved. There's so much violence in life in our society. You look at a lot of it's stunning how much not just fear in, say, horror films, but how many horror films are out there that make people fearful. But usually horror films are filled with just gory violence. And I've seen some of these streaming video sites where there's just so many horror films. I'm thinking, I didn't know there was that many horror films out there. It's just like just you could fill your minds with all kinds of darkness and violence. And I mean, it's just disturbing to even watch it, or even to see some of the titles, or even see some of maybe the covers of them. It's just darkness. It's violence. And so we live in a violent day where we don't necessarily see as much violence in the streets, although in some places we have seen that and we do see that. But there's still violence in a lot of people's minds and in their television sets, in their computers. There's a lot of violence. And that is a characteristic of evil men, is the violence. And then we also see in verse 2, which imagine mischiefs in their hearts. So there's the violent man that has more to the outworking of what they do on the outside, but then there's also imagining mischief in their heart, and so it's in their mind, in their hearts, of basically thinking up trouble. I mean, that's why it's important for people to have something constructive to do. People should have jobs. People should put their mind to working and doing something that is actually productive and profitable, because when that is not the case, what the Bible also says in Genesis, that the earth was filled with violence, and there was also, the imaginations of the heart of man were evil continually. And so it wasn't just the outward manifestation of violence, it was also the inward of the imagination of evil, and the imagination of just getting into trouble, doing things that were wicked and evil. They were also gathered together for war continually. Are they gathered together for war? And we can see that even throughout our history. There are more years in which there's some sort of war going on somewhere than there is complete peace in the earth. And the history is made up of wars, a lot of wars. If you just look at all the wars in our history of the United States in the 200 and some odd years of the history of the United States, there are a lot of wars. I had looked it up for Memorial Day, looking to see. I was going to read down through some of the wars, and I was thinking, I don't want to leave any wars out. But then it would have taken too long to go through the list during a service and just to say who died. So I said, all right, here's the total. Just give the total, because there's a lot, especially when you add the smaller wars and battles in there that our nation has been involved in. And so, but what David was facing, there are people gathered for war against him. I mean, they're amassing their armies, and when he was running from Saul was gathering thousands of people together. I mean, he's going after David, one man. I mean, David had some other men with him, but the object of Saul's ire was just one man, and he's gathering for war. Like, he's just going out to battle a nation. And so that was another aspect of the evil men, is that they're gathered for war. And by the way, there are a lot of evil people who like there to be war. And there are a lot of, and I'm not even going to get into this. I'm just going to say just one thing about it. Just make this statement because it's just too detailed to get into. But there are people throughout history who have made a lot of money, and they still make a lot of money off of war. And so it is in their best interest to continue the war, keep the war machine moving because of money and power and conflict. And that is a part of our history, not just the history of the U.S., but history in other parts of the world, but especially in the history of the U.S. and as we've been throughout. There's the powers that be, the people with money who have pushed for more war and have profited off of both sides of wars. And that continues on even to this day with there being a lot of money involved. So there are people who And there's a term, I don't know who came up with this term. I've heard Ron Paul use it, the former representative. He's used this word. He likes to call them warmongers. Not whoremongers, but warmongers. And that's a good word for them. That's the word that comes to my mind, of warmongers. And there are. I mean, they're in the government today, and they're very entrenched in the government. Warmongers. They're always looking for somebody else to go to war with. And so there are just some people that are bent on that. And it's a dangerous thing for a country to be just always involved in war. Because, number one, there's one thing if there's a justified war where you have to defend yourself and the country comes together, but then if there's war that's just for the sake of we got to go after somebody, and that's what it seems like a lot of times, we got to be going after somebody, then that's a dangerous thing for a country because it harms a country financially. It harms a country patriotically because if it's not a justified war or conflict, then it divides the country and does not bring a country together, so it weakens a country in that way as well. But so they're gathered for war. They also, in verse 3, they have sharpened their tongues like a serpent. Adder's poison is under their lips. They have biting and dangerous words. So we see their actions, their violent actions being gathered for war. They have evil imaginations. They're thinking of mischief. And then the words that come out of their mouth are very biting and dangerous words. They have sharpened their tongues like a serpent, and poison is under their lips. And so that has to do with their words. And words are very powerful. We see the power of words today, and not just today, but through all of history, the power of words, and the power of what you say, and then it's oftentimes better what you don't say, and especially when it comes to social media, what you don't type. Because the power of words is that there are people who have just said stupid things and they actually typed it and must not have thought about it. It's one thing if something comes out of your mouth, boom, it's just instinctive, it's reflexive. All right, it came to mind, it comes out of your mouth. Okay, people might say things they shouldn't say, but is there not like a circuit breaker or something from between your brain and your fingers? You'd have a little bit more time to think about, do I really want to type this? And I can even identify with, there's things that I want to type and I want to say to people, and I've actually typed it out, but then I erased it and I didn't send it. I didn't hit it. And I've always felt better about that. I thought, if there's any doubt, just forget about it. Just don't even say anything. And but the words, just dangerous words. When you look at our mainstream media today and the words that they use and the attacks on things that are good and right in a lot of ways, and trying to undermine and trying to get an agenda across, you see the words of politicians, elected officials, and it can be troubling to see the biting and dangerous words, and then the words that people use to each other. Talk to each other about, especially things that they would not usually say to each other in person, but they will have no problem going back and forth online and on Facebook's other social media, and they say biting words. And that's the day in which we live. And that just shows the heart of man, that there's just absolutely no place for that, especially in the life of a Christian, to be involved in biting words and the words that are like poisonous words that can harm other people in that what we see today. But that's what David faced. He faced, and there was an example of who had dangerous words, who had biting words. Well, one was Doeg. And when David had gone and eaten some of the showbread, he had gotten some of the showbread at the tabernacle and with the priest. He'd gotten some of the showbread. He'd gotten Goliath's sword, and who saw him there? It was Doeg, Saul's man. And because of that, because of what Doeg went and said back to Saul, Saul went and they had many of the priests killed at that time, and it was a tragic thing. for them to face. And it was the biting words, dangerous words. Doeg didn't have to say anything, but he was against David. He was against what was right, and so there were other people who lost their lives because of Doeg's words. And the next verse here in verse 4, keep me, O Lord, from the hands of the wicked. Preserve me from the violent man who have purpose to overthrow my goings. So there we see the word violent again. We see the word wicked. But it says, have purpose to overthrow my goings. The proud have hid a snare for me. So they try to cause the righteous to stumble and fall. The characteristics of evil men is they try to cause the righteous to stumble and fall. They want to overthrow his goings. In other words, they want to disrupt his path, the way that he's going. They want to overthrow that. They want to turn him in a different direction. They want to destroy his goings and conquer him. And that's what is happening today among the wicked, among the evil. They want those in the right to stumble and fall. They want those who are living for God, those who are actually taking a stand for the right things, they want them to be overthrown. And one of the reasons, kind of going back to current events, one of the reasons that that people were so angry and have been so opposed to President Trump was that he is the representative, supposedly, for, he's the one that evangelical Christians support. And so there's the being against what is perceived to be, oh, you're the one who represents Christians. You're the one who represents who is right. And then there are Christians who will then wholeheartedly support President Trump, even though President Trump himself, he uses foul language. He's been involved in a lot of immoral business and is still to a certain degree. His family still is to a certain degree. And so then there are Christians who just wholeheartedly support a man like that. And then the people say, well, how could you even support someone like President Trump? Look at what he says, look at what he does. But then there are people who get their imaginations set up in their mind like basically he's just the most dangerous man on the planet, which he's not. And so they get in their imagination all these things, and the imaginations are very powerful. But then what they do is, for those that are standing for right, they try to get them to stumble and fall, and they take pleasure in when they have their way, which is the wicked way, the wrong way, rather than going on the side of right. And then it's in verse 5 it says the proud. They're known as proud, the evil men. So we have these characteristics of evil men. So there's quite a list there that we see that we can make out of these few verses. So David is recognizing the characteristics of evil men, and he's asking God for deliverance from them. And he needed that. And as we go along in these days and these months and years ahead, we're going to need to ask God for protection and deliverance from evil men. Because there are powerful forces at work that are looking to overthrow what is good and right. And there's a Christian lawyer who said, and he said this years ago, that he said, there are people who have said to me, he said, we are going to, now this Christian lawyer represents a lot of Christian churches and Christian ministries. That's usually in Christian people. That's what they specialize in, and they're an actual Christian ministry. Not like they are a regular law firm, but he said years ago, there are people who have said that we will destroy you. There are people who have said this to him, and he said, and the problem is, the scary thing is they actually do have the power to do it. The ones who have said this, these aren't people that are just mouthing off. Like, these are powerful people who could destroy him if they were able to, or if they chose to, if they had the opportunity. And we may not see that out in the open, but those types of things are behind the scenes. That there are powerful people and powerful forces at work that want to destroy what is good and right. and particularly what is according to the Bible, according to standing for the truth of God's Word and the Christian faith. But David says a prayer here. He asks God as he gives a prayer for the wicked not to succeed. Look at verse 6. I said unto the Lord, Thou art my God. Hear the voice of my supplications, O Lord. O God, the Lord, the strength of my salvation. Thou hast covered my head in the day of battle. Grant not, O Lord, the desires of the wicked. Further not his wicked device, lest they exalt themselves. Because they usually feel, when they get their way, they usually feel pretty good about themselves, and it can be rather frustrating. It can be rather aggravating to see that. It really can. He says in verse 9, As for the head of those that compass me about, let the mischief of their own lips cover them. Let burning coals fall upon them. Let them be cast into the fire, into deep pits, that they rise not up again. Let not an evil speaker be established in the earth. Evil shall hunt the violent man to overthrow him. This is this is how we need to respond to evil in our country. Is we need to take it to the Lord and ask God, let the mischief of their own lips cover them. They might be causing all these problems with their mouth. May it come back upon them. God, would you take care of that? And because a lot of people, they want to take that into their own hands. They want to be single-handedly responsible. I'm going to make these people, get a taste of their own medicine. I'm going to take care of this. I'm going to do battle. I'm going to do battle in the culture war, so to speak. If you're more concerned with battle in a culture war than the spiritual war, well, you're missing the whole point. Now, the culture war is ultimately a spiritual battle, but if you start with just simply the culture, you're missing the spiritual aspect of it. And one of the things that is actually a hindrance to fighting the spiritual battle is by thinking that we need to, let's take the side of conservatism. Now, a lot of Christians don't like that, to say, oh, we shouldn't be just so focused on conservatism. But conservatism is not the hope of America. Conservatism is not. There's a lot of lost people who are supporters of conservatism. Are they the hope of America? Now, I'm glad if we can find common ground on some values, then great. Then I'm for that. I'll find common ground as far as I can. But conservatism is not the hope of America. Unfortunately, Christians have been placing their hope in conservatism for a long time, and look where we are. We've had plenty of so-called conservatives in office, and look where we are still today. Conservatism is not the hope of America. I'm for good, decent people, and electing good, decent people into office that are going to be more mindful of our values, that are more open to at least listening to our values. That's a good step. But at the same time, that's not the hope of America. We need to learn to take things to the Lord in prayer. And that's the problem with one of the problems of social media, is that people spend their time fighting the battles on social media. It is a waste of time. It is a waste of time to fight the battles on social media. There was a preacher who actually preached a number of years ago. This was during a missions conference of all things. He's an Australian preacher, and this was years ago. I think when I was I was still in Bible college, and he preached a message called "Focusing on the Focus," and it was basically all an anti-Facebook message. But what he said was, and one of the reasons he was so against Facebook is he said he knew of several different pastors who had their ministries destroyed because of gossip on Facebook. That basically they had to leave the pastorate because of what people were spreading, the lies and the gossip and slander on Facebook about them. And so he did not care for Facebook. But what he said was, there was one woman who was trying to justify her continued use and spending time on Facebook. She said, and he says in his Australian accent, of what this woman said, well, I'm spreading the Bible. He's basically, nobody cares. Nobody sees your post. The ones that see your posts are your friends. And chances are a lot of your friends are already Christians. Now, if you want to use a social media platform as a way of edification and maybe some information, that's fine. There are responsible ways to use social media, but there are some people, I think, they get on there and they think that based on what they post, they're just going to change the world. I mean, because they posted whatever it was on their mind at that time, they're now going to change the world. No, you're not going to change the world. So what we need are people who get back to, Christian people who get back to spending more time in prayer than they do fighting the culture battles and the Facebook social media battles and obsessing over the current events of the day. We just need to get back to prayer, to God's Word, to doubling down on what is most important. And this is a great time in our lives, a great time in history, I think, that this will, when the history books are written about this, I think for Christians, this will have been one of the greatest times to have the word is not even coming to my mind, but a reconsideration or a reprioritization or a reassessing, that's what I want, a reassessing or taking inventory of what am I living for? What is most important to me in life? And I hope there are Christians who are not missing. I hope there's no one here who is missing that opportunity. And I hope there are Christians all over the place that are not missing that opportunity. Because I think this is one of the greatest opportunities that God has given to us to really, it's a turning point. There's a lot of turning points. That we might be facing more challenges as we go forward into the future. But it's a time of greater opportunity to lean on the Lord, stand strong, and see God work in mighty ways in the lives of Christians and in our churches. We don't want to miss that. I don't want to miss that. So he's praying for the wicked not to succeed. Let not an evil speaker be established in the earth. So if you're concerned about what's going on in the world, take it to God like David did. He took it to God and said, would you let these people not succeed? Would you really do that? And what would happen if we had a nation full of praying people like that? It would be a powerful force in our country. And then finally, verses 12 and 13, we have a recognition of whose side God is on. And this is a wonderful thing. I know that the Lord will maintain the cause of the afflicted and the right of the poor. Surely the righteous shall give thanks unto thy name. The upright shall dwell in thy presence. So whose side is God on? God is on the side of the afflicted. He will maintain the cause of the afflicted. You know, David, in his case, he was afflicted. He was facing tribulation, persecution at that time. The afflicted, the right of the poor. He's on the side of the poor. He's on the side of the righteous. The upright. The upright shall dwell in thy presence. Who are going to be the closest ones to God? The ones who are dwelling in God's, it's the righteous. Who are going to be the closest to God or dwelling in His presence? It's the upright. It's the righteous. It's the ones who are not evil men, are not the ones who have the characteristics of evil men, like violence, imagining mischief, gathering for war, biting in dangerous words, trying to cause the righteous to stumble and fall, and being proud. But there are many that are falling by the wayside, many that are going in just an apostate direction, but we need to recognize our position in Christ as the righteous, as the upright, as the saved, the redeemed, and recognize that's whose side God is on. That's whose side God is on. There's another portion of Scripture that says, the Lord is on my side. I shall not fear what man shall do to me, because the Lord is on my side. And that's, if the Lord is on your side, there used to be I don't think it's used as much anymore, but, you know, God plus you equals a majority, or you plus God equals a majority. And whether or not, whatever, you know, if you want to say whether you use the word majority or not, the point of the matter is being on God's side and having God on your side is the most important thing no matter what other humans are on your side. I want God on my side. I want to be on God's side as the upright and the righteous. But we have to recognize the physical danger, the increasing physical danger, and especially as we get into increasingly spiritually dangerous times. There was a church in, I can't even remember what state it was now. I think it was upstate New York now that I think about it. There were some apparently some devil worshipers that and I don't know what prompted this. I don't know what happened, what was preached, or what. I don't know. But there were some devil worshipers who did some sort of ritual right in front of a church in upstate New York. And like I said, I have no idea. All I saw was just a post about it. Didn't see any details. Just someone took a picture. And but by the way, witchcraft and devil worship is on the rise in America. It's especially over the last few years, it's been on the rise in the Hudson Valley region of New York. That's been one of the hot spot areas. But it's all over the place. When a friend of mine, one of my wife's friends from college, when she was in college, that her dad was I believe a Pentecostal pastor. My wife's friend in college, he was on actually in Bar Harbor, Maine, and she said that is a just really hot spot for a lot of witchcraft and occultism and just a lot of it there, even back that time years ago. And there's a lot of that. And as our nation flies forward in its rebellious spirit and its ungodliness, anti-Christian sentiment, we're going to see more people turning to the darkness and the devil. And so how do you fight that? We have to fight it through spiritual means. And so that's why I really want to get across tonight. Just as David was facing physical danger from evil men, we face a lot of spiritual danger from the devil and from evil men, which then increasingly involves physical danger, but especially the spiritual danger. And so what are we going to do? Well, let's, like David, take things to the Lord in prayer, praying that the wicked would not succeed, praying for deliverance, praying for protection, and then recognizing whose side God is on. No matter what the majority on this earth or majority of America says, we need to recognize whose side God is on and purpose. We're going to stay on God's side. We're going to stay on God's side, the side of righteousness and uprightness. And we're not going to cower in fear. We're not going to give in, and we're going to be vigilant, because the devil and the evil men would like to cause the righteous to stumble and fall. So we need to be vigilant. We need to be people of prayer, people of the Word, living very wisely in these physically and spiritually dangerous times.